The rain had softened into a silver mist by the time Charlotte stepped off the late bus, its headlights dissolving behind her like a fading memory. The small coastal town of Briar Shore felt drowned in twilight, the kind that blurs the edges of things, rooftops, lampposts, thoughts. She pulled her coat closer around her, as if it could shield her from the quiet ache she carried everywhere, the ache of a life that had never quite chosen her back. Charlotte wasn't running from anything dramatic, no scandal, no heartbreak worthy of headlines. She was simply tired. Tired of scraping by in the city, tired of pretending she was fine, tired of feeling invisible in a world that rewarded noise more than sincerity. When her aunt invited her to stay in the old seaside house for a few months, she accepted with a mixture of relief and guilt. She needed the silence, even if she didn't know what to do with it. Sometimes silence is the only place the truth speaks. The smell of salt and wet pine drifted through the evening air as she made her way down the narrow, uneven road. Houses rested like sleeping giants along the cliffs, their windows glowing in soft amber. Somewhere far below, waves crashed against the rocks with the certainty of time itself. Charlotte paused, inhaling the cold, steady wind. It made her feel small in a way she secretly appreciated. She had grown up with little. Money was always a rumor in her family, not a reality. But she had learned tenderness early, learned how to listen, how to hold space for others, how to love without needing to be seen. What she had never learned was how to be loved in return. That lesson always seemed to slip through her fingers. Tonight, she wasn't expecting anything different. But life has a way of shifting quietly, like a tide turning beneath your feet. She first saw him near the old boathouse, repairing a broken wooden rail. The lamplight cast a silhouette in shades of gold and shadow, making him look both part of this world and slightly outside it. He worked with deliberate calm, his hands steady, his expression unreadable from the distance. Charlotte slowed her steps without meaning to. There was something about him, an aura of quiet strength wrapped in an unpolished, almost humble exterior. His clothes were worn, as if chosen for utility rather than appearance. His dark hair was rain-damp, falling across his forehead, and his posture carried a kind of effortless balance, like someone used to building things that lasted. She shouldn't have stared, but she did. As if feeling the weight of her gaze, the man lifted his head. Their eyes met, not in the way strangers usually collide, quick, embarrassed, apologetic, but in a soft, suspended moment that stretched wider than the space between them. His eyes were a deep, storm-colored blue, and for a brief heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, recognition, or maybe the quiet surprise of seeing someone who wasn't pretending. He offered a small, warm nod, the kind that felt like an invitation without a single word spoken. Charlotte froze, caught between stepping forward and disappearing into the mist. Then he spoke, his voice low and roughened by the cold. "Evening. Careful on that path. It's slippery after the rain." Just a simple warning. And yet somehow it felt like more. She managed a soft, "Thank you," hoping her voice didn't betray the sudden flutter building in her chest. He smiled, not wide, not flashy, just a quiet curve of sincerity. "Name's James," he said, wiping his hands on his work gloves. "James Whitmore." Whitmore. The name tugged at something faint and distant, but she couldn't place it. "Charlotte," she replied, hugging her coat tighter. "I'm staying up the road for a while." "Well," he said gently, "if you ever need help settling in, I'm usually around." She nodded, though she didn't understand why her heart reacted as if someone had knocked lightly on its door. Because sometimes the soul recognizes something long before the mind does. They lingered in a silence that felt strangely comforting, as if the mist had wrapped them together in a fragile, temporary world. Then she turned to continue up the path, feeling his gaze follow her, not intrusive, not possessive, just quietly aware. With each step, the wind carried her a whisper of a truth she couldn't yet name. Some truths only bloom in the dark. As she reached the old house, Charlotte looked back. James was still there, his figure outlined against the lamplight. Solid, calm, unknowable. A beginning she didn't see coming. And a secret she had no idea he carried. Charlotte hadn't meant to search for him the next morning, yet her eyes wandered instinctively toward the cliffs as soon as the early light spilled across the waves. Briar Shore looked different in daylight, less mystical, more honest. The air carried the crisp scent of sea lavender, and gulls circled overhead in lazy arcs. She tried to tell herself she wasn't waiting for James, but honesty had never been her strongest shield. She found him near the docks, hauling wooden planks from a small truck. His posture was relaxed, though there was purpose in every movement. When he noticed her, something subtle shifted in his expression, like a soft ripple across still water. "Morning, Charlotte," he called out. His voice warmed the space between them. She approached slowly. "You're up early." "Work doesn't like waiting," he replied, setting down a plank with careful precision. She admired that about him already, how he treated even simple tasks with a quiet reverence, as if everything mattered. Sometimes the smallest things reveal the truth of someone. They walked toward the pier together, their steps echoing softly against the damp wood. For a moment, the world shrank to just the rhythm of their footsteps and the hush of the ocean breathing against the shore. James glanced at her. "You settling into the house?" "I think the house is settling into me," she said, smiling faintly. "It's quieter than I expected." "Quieter is good," he murmured. "Most people don't know what to do with it." Charlotte did. Silence had always been the one place she could hear her own thoughts clearly. They stood at the edge of the pier, looking out at the horizon. The wind brushed strands of hair across her face. Before she could move them aside, James lifted his hand, not touching her, but hovering close enough to ask permission with a gesture alone. A small, careful gesture, a little universe of meaning. She tucked her hair behind her ear, and he lowered his hand, offering a half-smile that held more emotion than words could manage. The unspoken lingered between them, but reality always finds a way back. A sleek black car pulled into the gravel lot behind them, its polished surface gleaming like an intrusion from another world. A sharply dressed couple stepped out, scanning the docks with expressions that carried more judgment than curiosity. Charlotte followed their gaze. "Tourists!" James's jaw tightened just slightly, barely noticeable unless someone had been studying him the way she had been. "Something like that," he replied. The couple approached, their shoes far too clean for the shoreline. "James," the woman said, her tone crisp. "Your father has been looking for you." Charlotte blinked. "Father?" The man beside the woman added, "You missed the breakfast meeting." Again, James kept his voice even. "I said I'd handle things here today. And we said you're needed at Whitmore Industries." The woman snapped quietly, though not quietly enough. Whitmore. The name that tugged at her in the mist the night before. Suddenly it became clear. James wasn't just a local worker fixing docks. He was a Whitmore. And the Whitmore family owned half the businesses stretching across the coastline: hotels, shipping yards, real estate developments. Wealthy, powerful, practically untouchable. Her breath caught, but she hid it well. He told her nothing. And yet, maybe there was a reason. His gaze flicked toward Charlotte, apology flickering through it like a shadow. "I'll be there later," he said flatly, dismissing the couple without raising his voice. But they weren't the type to accept dismissal. The man leaned closer, whispering sharply, "You can't keep playing this game, James. Pretending to be someone you're not. It's reckless." Charlotte felt the words hit her like cold rain. Pretending. Before she could process it further, the couple left, their car disappearing in a cloud of expensive dust. James exhaled slowly, the tension draining from his shoulders as if he'd been holding it for hours. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." She studied him, heart thudding with quiet confusion. "Why did they talk like you were hiding?" He looked out at the sea, expression unreadable. "Because they don't understand the difference between a life and a legacy." A pause, a truth hovering unsaid. "And what are you trying to find here?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers, storm blue, steady, honest in a way that contradicted everything she had just heard. "Someone who sees me before they see everything else." Her pulse stilled, then raced. A forbidden truth was beginning to form. Because Charlotte, with her modest past and quiet heart, lived in a world miles away from his. Everything about him, his name, his inheritance, his expectations, was a gate she was never meant to pass. And yet, their worlds had already begun to lean toward each other. James stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the cool morning air. "This place, being here, It's the only time I get to be who I actually am. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. And who is that? That, he said. I'm still figuring out. Before she could respond, a sudden gust of wind knocked loose a stack of papers from the truck behind them, blueprints, stamped with Whitmore Industries in bold ink. Plans, construction, development, the kind that could swallow an entire coastline. Charlotte felt a chill. Something was about to change. The week after Charlotte stepped into the Whitmore estate with the blueprints tucked carefully into her bag, felt like moving through a storm she couldn't see, but could feel pressing against her skin. Every hallway seemed sharper. Every whisper seemed directed at her. And James was different. Not colder, just conflicted. And conflict has a sound. It echoes in the pauses between words. It trembles in a breath held too long. It lingers in a gaze that wants to stay but knows it shouldn't. Charlotte sensed it the moment he walked into the kitchen where she was preparing lunch for his grandmother. He stopped in the doorway, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jeans. The jeans he wore when pretending to be someone simpler, humbler, more ordinary than the heir he truly was. His voice carried something unspoken. Charlotte, we need to talk. Her heart dipped. He rarely used that tone with her. Quiet, wary, as if he'd arrived at a crossroads and didn't know which path would break him less. But before she could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mrs. Whitmore entered with the regal grace of someone who had never taken an insecure breath in her life. James straightened instantly, and the moment shattered like glass. Charlotte stepped back, giving space that felt like surrender. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes passed over her, polite, dismissive, vaguely curious. Charlotte had seen that look 100 times from people who believed kindness was something you earned, not something you deserved. James, the older woman said smoothly, a word with you? And just like that, the fragile thread between them thinned to the point of snapping. Later that afternoon, Charlotte found the courage to approach him again. He was by the maple tree near the back fence, the place where he always went when he needed to think, when the dual weight of his lie and his legacy pressed too heavily on his shoulders. She walked toward him slowly. He didn't turn. James, she whispered. He exhaled. You shouldn't be here. The words stung more than she expected. Because of your grandmother? He hesitated. Because of everything. Silence grew between them like frost. And then came the shift. You disappeared after talking to my father, James said softly. Did he tell you something? Did he ask you to stay away from me? Her breath caught. Your father? I haven't spoken to him. He finally turned toward her, confusion tightening his expression. Then who told you about the expansion plans? The blueprints. Her stomach tightened. This was it. The turning point. The unraveling. James, your grandmother told me. She said you needed help organizing them. That it would take something off your plate. His face changed. Not with anger, but with realization and fear. My grandmother would never ask you to handle something that's sensitive, he said slowly. Charlotte, she doesn't want you here. The words landed like a blade. She thinks you're a distraction, he continued. That you'll get in the way of what I'm supposed to do. Who I'm supposed to become. Charlotte stepped back, pulse shaking. But she said, I know what she said. His jaw clenched. She lies when it benefits the family. One sentence. A quiet earthquake. Charlotte felt the ground shift beneath her. A cold truth settled between them. Not about James, but about the world that had shaped him, trapped him, demanded things from him that she couldn't fully comprehend. And then came the second blow. My grandmother saw us, he said softly. Last week, near the garden. When you touched my sleeve. Charlotte's breath trembled. She told my father you were manipulating me, he whispered. She said I was too naive to see your intentions. The accusation wasn't just cruel. It was humiliating. She swallowed hard. And what do you think, James? His eyes closed as if the question hurt. I think I made this harder for you. I never should have let it get this far. Her chest cracked open. Get what this far? You know. No. She wanted him to say it, to claim it, to make it real. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, just an inch. But enough. Enough to make her understand the truth. They were falling in different directions, and neither could catch the other. Charlotte, he whispered, I can't risk you being hurt because of me. "But you already are hurting me," she said, voice barely audible. His breath faltered. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Silent, almost invisible. He reached toward her, but he didn't touch her. Not this time. He let his hand fall to his side. "Maybe," he said, breaking. "Distance will protect us." It was the softest lie he'd ever told, and the deepest wound she'd ever received. Charlotte turned before he could see the collapse in her eyes. She walked away from him. One step, then another, and with each step, something inside her unwove. Halfway to the house, she heard his voice behind her, shaken, hurting, lost. "Charlotte!" She didn't turn, because turning would mean hoping, and hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. She kept walking until his voice faded into the wind, leaving behind the boy who pretended to be poor and the girl who had loved him without knowing the cost. The days that followed carried the quiet ache of something unfinished, like a wound that refused to close because the blade had been pulled out too slowly. Charlotte moved through the Whitmore estate as if made of glass, careful, distant, invisible by choice. She knew Mrs. Whitmore watched her. She knew whispers traveled faster than truth in houses built on legacy. But what she couldn't know, was that James was unraveling in ways he hid even from himself. And the truth has its own gravity. It pulls everything toward the moment it can no longer be buried. On the fourth morning, Charlotte found an envelope slipped under her door at the guest house. Her name written in handwriting she recognized instantly, steady, slightly slanted, unmistakably James. She hesitated. She opened it anyway. Inside, a note, short and trembling at the edges. "Meet me by the maple tree at dusk. Please. James." Her breath caught. The same tree where everything had fractured. She almost didn't go. Pride whispered warnings. Fear whispered louder. But hope whispered differently. So at dusk, she walked toward the tree, the last of the sunlight brushing gold across the yard. James stood there waiting, shoulders rigid, hands restless at his sides. He looked like someone carrying a truth, too heavy to keep hidden. "Charlotte," he said, voice unsteady. "Thank you for coming." She crossed her arms gently, not defensive, just tired. "You said you needed to talk." "I do." His eyes met hers, raw, unguarded. "I owe you the truth. All of it." She waited, and then he finally exhaled. "My grandmother didn't just tell my father lies about you. She told me something too." His voice tightened. "She said you were using me for a chance at money, influence, a better life. She made it sound reasonable enough that, for one awful moment, I believed her." Charlotte's breath broke in her chest. He saw the hurt, real, sharp, unhidden, and it shattered something in him. "I was angry," he confessed. "But not at you. Angry at myself for letting someone get close. Angry at the lie I've been living. Angry at my family for thinking so little of people they don't even know." He stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but enough to feel the warmth between them again. "You deserve to know everything," he continued. His shoulders straightened, as if bracing for impact. "My real name is James Montgomery. My family, they're not just wealthy. They're power, influence, old money that doesn't bend, doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. My father expects obedience. My grandmother expects perfection. And they expect me," his voice cracked, "to marry someone chosen for me years ago." The words struck her like cold rain. A predetermined life. A predetermined bride. A predetermined future. "And pretending to be poor," she whispered. He swallowed. "It was the only way I could meet people who didn't care about my last name. Or my inheritance. Or my curse." His eyes softened, breaking open. "It was the only way I could meet someone like you." Silence hovered, heavy, tender, fragile. Then he added, barely audible, "I was afraid that if you knew who I really was, you'd look at me like everyone else does." The ache in her chest shifted, less pain, more understanding. "James," she said quietly, "I never cared about what you had. I only cared about who you were when you looked at me." His breath trembled, hope flickering like a candle in wind. But truth is not gentle. It tests before it heals. "So what now?" Charlotte asked softly. "Your family won't suddenly approve. Your grandmother won't suddenly change. And you have obligations I can't match." He closed the distance between them by one step, Just one, but enough to make her heart stutter. "I don't want a life that's chosen for me," he said. "I want a life that's true, even if it costs me everything." Hope sparked, uninvited, unstoppable. But she held his gaze with quiet strength. "And what if it costs me everything, too?" His answer came without hesitation. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure the cost was worth it." A single tear slipped down Charlotte's cheek, not of pain this time, but of release. James lifted his hand, slowly, as if asking for permission rather than assuming it. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, reverent, unsure. It was the first touch since the distance. The first touch since the breaking. A touch that felt like the beginning of something fragile but real. "I'm not asking you to choose now," he whispered. "Just don't walk away without knowing the truth." Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of his hand seep into the cold places inside her. When she opened them, her voice came soft but steady. "I'm not walking away, James." His breath caught. Not a reconciliation. Not yet, but the first step toward it. A spark of hope, still weighed with uncertainty. But finally, undeniably alive. The morning rose more slowly in that small coastal town, as if the sun itself were afraid to illuminate what remained between Charlotte and James. The world seemed suspended in a silence made of fragile possibilities, the kind of silence that precedes both healing and loss. Charlotte walked along the empty pier, the wind pulling her hair back as if trying to carry her to the past, to that first moment when their worlds collided. She drew a deep breath, trying to steady the heart that insisted on beating in the rhythm of farewell, even when she wished it would beat in the rhythm of beginning. Behind her, familiar footsteps, weak, hesitant, as if each one cost courage. She didn't need to turn to know it was James, but she turned anyway, and there he was, with the same look that always seemed to hold shadows and sincerity, storms and promises. A look that always said more than his words dared. "You came," Charlotte murmured, her voice low, as if afraid the air might shatter. James approached, his face marked by sleepless nights, but also by a determination she hadn't seen before. "I never stopped coming, Charlotte. I just didn't know how to stay." The sentence hung between them. A soft reminder, a late lament, and a silent request for forgiveness. Charlotte looked away toward the sea, searching for strength in a place where she found only vertigo. "The truth hurt, James. Not because you were wrong, but because you hid from me that you were carrying everything alone. I would have carried it with you." He inhaled deeply, guilt visible. "I thought I was protecting you. That keeping distance was the only way to stop you from being dragged into my conflicts. But in the end, I only hurt you more." She gave a humorless smile. "Love was never the problem, James. Silence was." He stepped closer, as if his own muscles pulled him toward her. "I know, and for so long silence was the only language I learned to survive. But with you, I always wanted more." Charlotte felt her chest tremble. Because that, exactly that, was the leitmotif that followed them from the beginning. "With you, I always wanted more." The phrase she'd heard in whispers, in glances, in fleeting courage. And now, here, it was spoken without shadows. "And what do you want now?" she asked. James didn't look away. "The truth, even when it hurts. You, even when the world tries to stop me. And a new beginning, if you still have room for that." She closed her eyes, because wanting was easy, but beginning again required surrender. And she was still afraid that love was too beautiful to survive expectations, differences, the pressure of a world that always tried to pull them apart. "Love didn't protect us, James," she whispered. He stepped closer, "but it brought us here. And maybe that means there's still something to save." The wind blew between them, carrying the scent of salt and change. Charlotte opened her eyes, meeting his. There was hope there. Not the naive hope that promises perfect endings, but conscious hope, mature, marked, real. The only kind that matters. James extended his hand but didn't touch her. He left it suspended in the air, a gesture of offering, of waiting, of respect. "I won't force anything. I just want you to know that, for the first time in my life, I'm willing to stay. Without running, without hiding, without giving you half of me." Charlotte looked at his hand, at the man who learned to lose before he learned to love, at the man who was now trying to love without fear of losing. She took a step forward, feeling her heart reorganize into something lighter, more sincere. And she finally touched his hand. A simple touch, but it carried their entire story, and the one they could still build. James exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for months. Charlotte felt the warmth coming from him, and for the first time since the beginning of the fall, her body relaxed. "I don't promise ease," she said, squeezing his hand. "But I promise truth. And if you stay, I stay too." He smiled, not a big smile, but that half-smile she recognized as the purest form of his sincerity. "With you," he repeated, almost reverently. "I always wanted more. Silence. Not the silence of distance, but the silence of reunion." Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to the human, imperfect, familiar rhythm. The sound that always brought her back to herself. The sea kept crashing, stubborn, eternal. The sky opened a ribbon of light. And for the first time, since the chaos, since the wounds, since the fear, they breathed in the same rhythm. Together. Charlotte lifted her face, eyes wet but steady. "So let's go slow, one step at a time, without hiding anything." "Slow," he repeated, "but together." The world seemed to release a sigh, and when the sun finally broke through completely, lighting the pier, lighting them, lighting the choice, Charlotte realized that freedom wasn't leaving. It was being able to stay with truth. And love, finally, stopped being a promise and became a path. The final sentence came like a signature of destiny. "With you I always wanted more, and now, finally, I can want without fear."